Hey everybody, guess what day of the week it is? Well, it's
Marriage Monday. It's Monday and it's Marriage Monday.
Marriage Monday, everybody.
Welcome.
Want to welcome you. It's good to have you here. We are ready to get going. My name is Kevin. This is Lisa, and we're here to talk about marriages, talk about ours, talk about yours, and we want to wish you a really great day today or evening tonight, wherever you are. We know we've got kind of people around the world and even people all across North America. Some of you in the West, you're a little earlier in your day. Some of you in the East, a little later in your day. Wherever you are, whatever you're doing, thanks so much for joining us. Good to have you here with us. Let's talk about things that we need to talk about really quick. First of all, most importantly, Happy Women's Day.
Oh,
today.
thank you. Thank
Today,
you.
of course, International Women's Day. And listen, we are really so excited to just sort of pause on a day like today. I know there's many of us here who are watching presently, and those who are watching a little bit later really see the benefit of taking some time and recognizing amazing women in our lives, but the contributions that women are doing in our lives around the world is really, really awesome. I am a very privileged guy because I have as my very best friend an amazing woman, and I love you.
Thank you.
I also have two really amazing daughters, so my life has always been, I have been always led and inspired and, taken care of and told the right way to live and to go by the women in my life, and I'm really, really grateful for them. So happy Women's Day to International Women's Day to all of you.
Absolutely, yes.
And especially to
Thank you, thank you.
And also, I just wanted to cover one other thing before I throw it over to you. This is certainly not nearly as important as International Women's Day, but yes, some of you are like, I'm not sure if I'm in the right place or not. Yes, you are in the right place in the unimportant category. I did shave my beard. So here's the story on that, so you don't even have to put it in the chat. I did promise Lisa that if we made it to the marriage
already
conference,
in the chat.
So if we made it to the end of the marriage conference, I promised Lisa I would shave my beard, and we did make it, and so there you go.
And we want to thank all of you who participated in the Stay Home Marriage Conference last Saturday. It was an amazing success. Hundreds of married couples joined us and have joined us since as well, because you can still access the conference if you would like. Just go to our website, but go to milestonechurches.com/stay-home, and you can register for the conference there if you'd like.
Do it again, that was awesome.
milestonechurches.com/stay-home. But also it's in the description on our YouTube channel right here tonight. So if you want to go there.
Yeah, if you don't want to have to type all that out, just make sure you look on the description down below the screen here.
Yes, but we have been asked by many people for that, if it's still available, and it is.
Yeah, so we are thankful to have had that conference, and that was a pretty cool experience. We are also always so thankful for our faithful group of friends that join us every Monday. And you guys know who you are. You're amazing. You're always here.
Yes, thank you.
When we are here, and we're just so grateful. We consider you amongst our friends and people who cheer us on. You're the reason we work really hard at this, and we're trying to learn things. A lot of times we learn things about ourselves and share it with you. You do the same to us.
Yes.
So this group that's live with us right now, you guys are super, super special. If you're watching later and you're not live with us, oh man, you're so special to us too. But those that are live with us right now and you're involved in the chat and stuff like that, man, we love you guys. So grateful for you.
Thank you.
Listen, we're very excited tonight because we think what we're going to talk about is starting this episode and some following episodes is going to be really, really good for your marriage.
Good for us and good for you.
That's right. And so here's what we're going to start talking. We're going to say this a few times. We're going to talk about beginning tonight, and we're hoping that this is a little bit deeper, but helpful for you. So don't sign up if you don't like deep. If you do like deep, stay there. It's going to be good for you. But we'll try to make the deep a little bit fun too along the way, if that's okay. But what we're talking about tonight is marriage triggers and traps. Marriage triggers and traps, and that's what our little talk is about, and we're going to start to peel back the layer on marriage triggers and traps.
Well, I think you would agree with me that we all have triggers and traps. We'll elaborate on that, but things that just trip us up, that catch us unawares. We're just going along life and in love and doing marriage
That's you and me,
well,
all the
and
time.
then boom, something just triggers us. Do you understand what I'm talking about? It's a powerful negative emotion that just doesn't even match the situation. It's a trigger. The trigger's small, but the reaction is big. And we wonder sometimes why we're so upset. And instead of being able to discuss what is actually bothering us, we just sort of, have this thing that comes out that can be from insecurities, from our past, maybe hurts, that the trigger has to do with something that's happened in the past, something inside of ourselves. And we often just wonder, wow, why did I react like that? So, we want to talk about triggers and traps in your marriage, things that can make you act in a way you don't want to act, lash out,
Can I ask you a couple questions
yes.
on that? Not to put you on the spot entirely.
Go ahead.
But when it comes to, I think first of all, we could acknowledge this. When we talk about triggers that happen, at least in our marriage, I don't think there's many of you that don't really know what we're talking about and don't really, most of us kind of understand
the word
these
itself
things.
kind of explains
Yeah,
it. Yes.
it's pretty self-explanatory. But I think a lot of us, if we're honest, although we know what triggers are, and we even may be able to point to them when they happen, we're not very good at sort of navigating our way around them. And so you mentioned how they can be negative, and I think that's what we're going to focus on here, not because we're negative people, but we're going to focus on that. But can there be, are all triggers negative? I guess, even just out of the gate, what do you think about that?
No, you can have positive triggers for sure. I mean, something you find out you won the lottery, for example. That would be a powerful trigger.
Okay.
That
think
would.
We can quote lots of stats of people who win the lottery.
I mean,
their lives
that
don't
too,
get
like something,
Yeah.
Something that happens or an event happens.
So there's
Good
good
news.
things, right?
Yeah, good things happen, unexpected,
and so that triggers something, and then the behavior
positive,
is ultimately a positive.
Yeah. Or some people might react in shock too, and have it triggers them to kind of shut down because they have to process, but it can still be a happy thing for sure.
Okay, so that question, again, a little bit obvious, and maybe
Not
even
what we're going to talk about
a little bit boring, but that's we're not going to talk about positive triggers tonight because we think you know how to handle them just fine. When positive things happen to you, or hey, here, when you look at me that way, that triggers me, and I think we're going to later. And okay, so you can handle all that by yourself. Let's talk a little bit.
That would be an interesting subject, though, to talk about positive triggers.
That's a trigger. Yeah, that's true. I just want to mention really quick, and I saw it on the chat that today is Ace and Dory, our friends Ace and Dory. Their 13th,
I saw that, their anniversary.
13th year anniversary today, I think, and they're here with us.
Wow.
Is that
Happy
a positive,
anniversary.
Is that a positive trigger or a negative trigger?
For us, you mean? That they would choose to be with us on their anniversary?
Happy anniversary, you guys. What are you doing here? No, we love you. Don't go anywhere. But thank you for being here, and happy anniversary to you guys. All the best, really. Okay, back to triggers and traps in our life a little bit. I kind of interrupted you, but do you feel like you said what you wanted to say as far as
I think
triggers
so.
and traps?
I think that we're going to talk more about it and elaborate, but it is something that is a sensitive. It hits a sensitive spot because of something in our past, and maybe an insecurity or
so
maybe
much
a
of our
hurt,
past.
and there's so much.
Isn't it amazing how much?
Some people talk about it as it hits on an area of unfinished business that we might have from things from our past as well. That we have to work out.
Yeah, sometimes I don't like to admit that I've got unfinished business.
I love,
Like
I love your explanation, though, of triggers and traps. Give them your explanation.
You don't want me to talk about how I don't like unfinished business. We should just.
Oh yes.
So let me give you some analogies. Some of you guys who know me know that I happen to find myself an outdoors person, especially when I was younger, and I'm quite familiar, as many of you are, quite familiar with triggers and traps. So let me do some analogies here. Picture in your mind, if you will, an actual trigger on a weapon. And we're Canadians, we don't like to talk about weapons that much. And so I'm not really talking about a weapon, but in your mind's eye, let's talk about a weapon. And a trigger that's on, for example, on a gun. And so it's interesting how these names come about. That thing triggered me, or I find myself trapped by that. Let's talk about those two things. If you get triggered in a gun, of course, there is a little flat button or lever that is called the trigger. And when you pull that trigger, when that little piece, and a lot of times guns can be quite large, but this little piece, the little trigger,
so small,
starts a whole process, right? So when that gets pulled, this also little innocuous thing called a firing pin, just a little wee pin, moves forward. And it moves forward, honestly, with not that much power. There's a little bit, I think, for some guns, it's like 15 pounds of power. It moves forward up to 30 pounds of power, and it hits what's called a cartridge. Now, I'm not going to bore you too much with how all this works, but most of you know. If not, you've watched enough television and movie shows to know. In that cartridge, or what sometimes you call a bullet, so this little pin moves forward, it hits the cartridge, and what happens is the whole thing fires. It explodes. And in there, of course, there's gunpowder, there's all kinds of things, and a massive amount of gas comes out.
So small, and yet
it's all
such a
contained in that little thing, and it fires a bullet out. So in your life, a lot of times, there's just a little thing that gets touched. And we're talking about marriage triggers and traps, and we find ourselves, has this ever happened in your marriage where you're like, whoa,
Yes.
whoa, what was that? Or, hey, where did that come from? What's going on? It almost feels like there was nothing, just a little touch, and then an explosion.
Yep.
And, a lot firing. And, of course, ultimately, the result of that explosion can be fatal, as we all know. So that's a trigger that is in guns, for example. But there's also traps, which we're talking about tonight. Now, traps are a little bit different. I did a lot of trapping in my life. That's not something we share a lot in the city. But, yeah, I did a long time ago. Not important.
Out of necessity.
Yeah, out of necessity, we did a lot of trapping. But here's what's interesting about traps. They're a little bit different than triggers, because traps are a type of item, a unit that is under pressure. And so a trap has a lot of spring mechanisms on it, and the trap is opened up and it remains in a constant state of tension. Does that sound like things that trigger in your life? Do you have something that's in a constant state of tension, and then someone comes along and touches it, and something happens there, right? So a trap also is
that's not good.
A trap also is something that is usually camouflaged. A trap is usually hidden. So unlike a trigger, like a weapon, which it can be out in plain sight or even used in some kind of threatening manner, traps are often benign, if you will. They're deliberately hidden, and so something comes along, unbeknownst to them, they step on this thing that has a lot of stress or tension in it, and it snaps and grabs and hurts, or even a lot of time suffocates the victim. And so as we talk about traps and triggers, we just thought, isn't that kind of interesting? I think in our marriages, we suffer from a lot of triggers.
Yep.
And a lot of times, even unbeknownst to us, some camouflaged areas that we don't even know, and all of a sudden, snap and ouch, there goes my ankle, or worse, there goes my marriage.
Everything kind of stops, right? When you're trapped, everything freezes.
Yeah.
And you have to get out of the trap, and sometimes that's hard to do.
That's right. So if you think about triggers, and you just mentioned that here, and you think about traps, we also want to kind of, help me out here. I want to talk a little bit about fighting and freezing, like you were just talking about.
I think when we are triggered, when you think of the fight, flight, and freeze reactions that we'll talk more about that in a second, and I think everyone talks about that. It's a pretty trendy thing to talk about, how our reactions are often when our amygdala, the part of our brain that reacts to danger and either fights or wants to flee, run away, or freeze, so that
the three F's, right?
You're not found out. The 3 F's, that's right. That's right. So we think of the triggers as part of the fight, like just a reaction, like you do something
explosion.
And I react in an inordinate amount of anger or negative emotion, and that's the fight. That's the fight response. Or the freeze, when you're caught in a trap, you're frozen. You can't get free. So we were thinking that's
and you would
kind
like
of
to
a great.
flee.
You would like to flee, but your leg is stuck in that trap, you know, or
Right.
whatever trap you're in. But we wanted to ask you about this, because you might be
Our
thinking,
faithful
what are you guys
friends.
talking about? So, you know, triggers. What kind of marriage triggers do you encounter, or maybe you don't have triggers, but
Oh,
like
they
I
do.
said, we all
They
have
do.
triggers.
They have to. Help us out a little bit.
Yeah, let's poll you guys, and you fill us in on what are some triggers in marriages. Little things, you're going along and then something happens
Explodes.
that just causes a really negative reaction.
Or something that you trip and step in and just something.
yeah.
But
Makes-
put name to some of those
Let's
feelings
hear.
if you could.
Oh,
So someone just said you ate all the leftovers. Well, we're now trending. We've got hashtags going here. Hashtag triggered.
Yes, very good, very good.
We'd like to ask that young man, is that ultimately creating you a fight or a flight type of thing? But
Past hurts.
past hurts.
Yes,
Sherry.
yes. And how can past hurts translate into a trigger today? You know, what can our spouse do or say, or what event or situation can we find ourselves in that can trigger a past hurt? Can we think of anything? Red and white flowers. Wow, that's a trigger.
That's
Oh, I mean,
that's
that
a
could
very
be,
nuanced trigger that we probably wouldn't be able to interpret.
It could be to do with a funeral or something. I don't know.
I'm not sure.
Maybe they could elaborate. Peter, Marissa.
Some misunderstanding.
That is so true. That is a real trigger, because after a certain amount of time being married, don't you think that your spouse should know you by now?
Are you talking to me?
They know, and then they show that they don't.
How is that
And
possible?
they misunderstand, or they tell you you're feeling a certain way, and yet that's not the way you're feeling. That can definitely
Seriously,
be a trigger.
after 30 years, like when exactly are you going to get to know me?
Yes,
right?
yeah. Okay, so the flowers were about a funeral. That would
Right.
definitely be a very sad trigger.
That's a good point. And that's a lot of times, at least in our analogies, I would suggest that those flowers, those moments, maybe sight, maybe scent, a lot of times are kind of traps that we fall into. We didn't actually see it coming like an explosion, but we were just kind of walking along, maybe even minding our own business, and boom, we get taken back to that place in time that.
Which could
is
be a
very
trap,
hurtful,
you know,
harmful.
into a downward spiral emotionally, for sure.
We've had one husband sharing, and this is not just a husband problem, but trying to solve your spouse, trying to solve your wife's problems rather than
instead of
actually listening. Man, I don't know if that is a purely male issue, but it seems to come up with a lot of guys. We don't really want to listen, but we do want to solve the problem, and a lot of times our spouse wants us.
Just want some
It'd be really great if you
validation.
would
Just affirm me.
just listen to me. Yep.
A certain tone of voice, that for sure. Because often what we know is that triggers can often remind, you know, your spouse can remind you of someone in your past as well. A certain tone of voice that someone that you
If you've ever felt
have
belittled
some,
by someone or insulted in some way.
Yep.
Yep. A sink full of dishes can be a trigger for
sink full
someone.
of dishes. Very
That's true.
true.
Yep.
Very true. Are you going to wear
wear
that?
that.
Question mark.
Yeah.
Okay. Yes, that can be very hurtful. Bringing up old hurts.
Okay, so these are some, I think, some really great examples. And I think it goes to show that as far as triggers and traps are concerned,
Yeah.
everybody is, can I use the cliche? Everybody is very unique. Everybody's different. And everybody gets set off by different things. The only thing we really do have in common with each other is that we get set off, is that we do get triggered.
Yes.
And we
Even
do fall
the
into
best of
traps.
us. Even the best of us, which is very frustrating for those who think we're the best.
That's right. Speaking on behalf of those who think
You
they're
just
the best.
go along, happy-go-lucky, and then boom, just something triggers you.
So I think that's a good place to pause and just say to those of us who are watching, who are married, who are a little bit frustrated and wondering, why is life like this? Well, we may not have all the answers for that, but we can affirm this: life is like this.
Yes.
And it's like this for absolutely everybody. So if you've been pretty hard on yourself by things that trigger you or traps that you guys have been falling into, maybe it's time for you to sort of lighten up a little bit and give each other some grace. But we want to talk a little bit more about this, and I just want to ask you, with everything that we appreciate the things that you guys just shared kind of trigger
Yeah,
you or can
yep.
possibly
Yeah, they're
trigger
still coming in.
people who are in a marriage. And I could kind of keep going as well, but let me ask you this. Are these, if I say, or maybe you could kind of give us an example of what triggers you?
Well, I think we do want to go a little deeper, and so some of the things that we're talking about can also be, they can be serious triggers. Don't get me wrong, but we're not wanting to talk about irritations tonight. We're not talking about small frustrations or irritations, but more, things that really do, set us off. Yeah.
Yep.
And so where those come from, back to we were talking about the fight, flight, freeze reactions, they really do come from sometime in our past, something happened and we got hurt or we got an insecurity and we got something,
A big word here is in our past.
in our past, yeah.
Unfortunately, this keeps coming up.
Yeah,
right?
and so our brain stores all that information, and over time, it compounds, and it just really kind of solidifies that that's a dangerous thing for us, or that's a really bad thing for us. And so someone else might think, no big deal, what's the big deal? But for us, it's a really big deal. I like to always use the example of, for me, and my fear of spiders. Because really what we're talking about is psychological fears that we have about things, and often based off of things in our past, because we're not talking about actual dangers, like your house is on fire, that's a trigger you should react to.
Yes.
But we're talking about things that are not deserving such a big reaction, and why are they getting it? So when I see a spider, for whatever reason from my childhood, my brother did have a pet spider that crawled around his room. That might have had something to do with it, but anyway. When I see a spider, that part of my brain, for the fight, flight, freeze, it gets set off. And especially early in my childhood and continued on. If you want to know more about that, get our book, because we do talk about the fight about a spider in our book.
That's right. Buy our book, and you can learn about Lisa's spider issues.
But that's something in my body, happens when I see a spider, and I've tried to train myself to not be so scared of that. But it really goes back to fear, right? The psychological fear. So certain things Kevin does that trigger me and make me really enraged, often, if I think about it, it has to do with fear, a psychological fear, based on something else that I have from my formative years and have, grown with. And so these are things we're committed to ourselves right now, and that's why we want to do this series, because we're really committed to working on these things in our relationship, so that we can have less of that negative, toxic stuff that really is not good for us. So I don't know if I answered your question there.
Yeah, you did.
But we're trying to talk more deeper than just irritations, but more things that are going on in our brain, in our psyche, and
yeah, we'd love to sort of highlight this. It is we think one of the most important things to really learn about your marriage. Usually what you're fighting about, or usually what you're reacting to, usually what you've been triggered by, or usually what trap you step into, is actually not the issue.
It's true.
With all due respect to what we've offered as what triggers us, and what you've offered as what triggers you, more than likely most of them actually aren't really the issue. Mm-hmm. Dishes in the sink, by their very nature, and I don't mean to insult the Tens or anybody else who put this up here, but dishes in the sink are neither positive or negative, but something deeper on the base level of who we are reacts to. Or when someone talks over you, look, people can talk over you. Someone out there can probably talk over you. It doesn't even bother you 1 minute, one bit.
Yeah.
It's got nothing, it doesn't affect you in any way. But if he or she talks over you and it reminds you of a long time ago, and that takes you, so the issues that we talk about that trigger us a lot of times aren't the issue. Usually we're discovering, and this is what we want to talk about in our next few episodes, is there's just actually a few things that really trigger us. When you get down to the base, But before we even talk about those, let's just talk a little bit about what happens when you get triggered or when you get trapped.
Yeah.
And Lisa talked about this.
It's a very physical reaction.
That's right. Those 4 F's that she talked about, right? You may respond. And I think this is good self-awareness. Just ask yourself right now, don't even make eye contact with your spouse to see, can you figure it out? Now, maybe some of you, right now, your spouse is somewhere else washing dishes while they listen or something like that. But who, or rather what, of those is your go-to reaction when you're triggered? Are you the person who fights?
Right.
So someone who, is that just your response? Something bad happened, you're going to fight. You're going to maybe not throw an actual punch, but you're going to throw a psychological punch.
Being super defensive can be a way to fight, right? Just a reaction of defensiveness because you're perceiving a fight. So you're.
That's right. I'm going to fight you before you fight me.
Yeah.
Right? I got to throw that first punch, right? Or what's next? Fight?
Flight.
Flight?
I'm out of here.
Yeah. And flight also can contain the world famous marriage response of just shutting down and being quiet.
Right, right.
Because for the most part, I'm not going to overreact. I'm not going to go anywhere right here, but I really want to get away. So I'm going to shut you out and give the cold shoulder, that sort of thing. Like, is there anything bigger in the responses so far of marriage? Fighting and being defensive and shutting down and blocking
Which
the
is
other
also
person out.
freezing. I think freezing,
freezing.
Is definitely, but the avoidance behavior would definitely be the fleeing, and freezing would just be, uncommunicative, like you said.
Yeah. And so all of this we're learning, and many of you guys know this too, and we're learning this to really make sure we help ourselves in our marriage. That a lot of this has to do with what some people want to call our primitive brain, the amygdala, right? There's a part of us that the way, and of course, we're people of faith, so we were going to say the way God put us together, there's a part of our brain that is our survival part of our brain.
Yes.
And if something happens to us, that part takes over. And so in a good way, it's doing its good job. But the problem is, especially in the world we live in today, it can really take over and not do a great job. So if you are under attack, if you are under threat in some way, if there was a large bear somewhere around right now, perhaps in our area here.
Or a big spider.
Or a big, perfect. Yeah, if there was a big spider that came down from the ceiling.
Like in the horror movies, that kind of spider,
like Harry Potter kind of spiders, or Lord of the Rings type of spiders, twice the size of you. Yeah, so what that does is, it's very interesting physically what happens. Immediately when you get triggered or when you get trapped, your heart rate increases immediately. Now what's a really cool thing, of course, this little part of your brain overrides all logic and it sends information to your heart. Your heart says, I got it, we're in trouble, starts sending all kinds of extra blood to the major muscles in your body. Those major muscles being the neck, the shoulders, and the big muscles in your leg that help you run. And that's what this is really all about. Now, you're saying, I want to talk about my marriage tonight. This is amazing stuff that actually impacts your marriage. And here's what also is interesting as well. The heart and the body immediately starts to change physiologically what's going on. And so you start to have a little bit more panicked breathing.
Right.
The body immediately stops sending blood to the organs in this area, to your stomach, and things like that.
No need to digest, because no time for
if
eating.
We're about to die, it doesn't really matter if you're digesting, if you're processing. That's not the issue right now. It's let's get air in those lungs, let's get blood to the big muscles and to the shoulders, and let's get you figuring out a way either to defend yourself or to get out of here. Isn't that kind of interesting?
It's why when you get in a fight, with your spouse, it just feels awful. Physically you feel awful.
Yep.
If it's a really bad, if you're really set off.
I got another
good.
cool thing that happens. And I think this may explain a lot of things when you're feeling triggered by your spouse. When this happens as well, all the juices get firing around in your brain. Am I allowed to say juices? I say that all the time. But another thing that happens is that your brain takes over your eyes. and you develop what's called a type of tunnel vision. And both males and females do this. Now,
Yes.
it makes perfect sense.
You can see it in the pupils.
If I've got a pack of
Yes.
wolves coming at me,
Yeah.
and I need to have tunnel vision because I need to be able to see clearly far away. But what also happens during this time is your tunnel vision gets focused here, but you lose peripheral vision. Now, think about you're in a marriage and you've been triggered against your spouse. You get tunnel vision towards that one thing that they've done, and you're unable to see
Can't see
anything else
anything
or recognize any good that they've done.
Yeah.
So the body thinks
They're
it's doing...
so bad in that moment. They are so bad.
The body thinks
That's
it's
all you
doing
can
you a
see.
favor, but the body doesn't remember that you're wearing a ring on your finger, and we're supposed to be using the prefrontal cortex now and learning how to. So isn't that kind of
Yeah.
interesting? Traps,
and trying
triggers.
to talk to each other when someone's been triggered and set off. Trying to talk to them and use reason and good logic. I mean, forget it. All what you just described needs to calm down
Yep.
before that can happen.
Probably why in the book of Proverbs there's several references to the fact that when someone gets offended,
Yeah.
it's game over. When someone
Yeah.
gets offended, they become like this giant wall.
This fortified
City that
yeah.
you can't get
Yeah.
into.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that describes any
Yes.
marriages that we've got going here, but I digress. I just wanted to
so
talk
we've
about what happens
thoroughly
to our body.
depressed them.
Yeah.
But even those of you who don't feel like, I'm not sure that happens to us very often, well, you haven't lived long enough yet because it will happen to you.
Wait till you get like us, kids.
No, as you live life and we all have triggers and traps,
Yeah,
and that's
so-
the whole point of it being a trap is you don't know it's there till you've stepped in it.
Yeah.
So
do we have
what do
any
we do? We do
solutions,
have
right?
some solutions, yes, and we're going to talk more in further episodes about it, but we've got this sort of three-pronged thing we want to suggest to you, which is when you have been triggered, what happens is you get into trouble. You don't want to get in trouble, and so we need training. So just think.
Hey, Lisa,
just think
all those start with T.
TR actually.
TR.
Just think
Trouble.
trigger,
Trigger.
trouble,
Trouble.
training.
Thank you.
And we are all going to be triggered, and it gets us into trouble.
Always.
But with training, hopefully we can take out the trouble. We can just kind of go from the
wouldn't that be-
trigger to the training, and skip the trouble. We would like to have less triggers, less often, and I think that's the goal, is not to never ever be triggered, never ever to have, be trapped in any sort of negative thinking. That's sort of heaven. So that's a goal, though, is to be less and less, because the more you're triggered, if you live a marriage that's just triggered all the time and just always trapped in all these bad negative downward cycles, that's really going to deteriorate your marriage. And so it would be good to figure this out.
So we've come up with these TR words since
Yes.
smart people before us came up with the 4 Fs, right? I think it was Cannon came up with
Oh, is
fear
that right?
and
Fight,
and
flight,
flight.
and fear.
Kevin and Lisa came up with triggered leads to trouble, and we need some training.
Yes.
And we just have to face the reality that when we do get triggered, we do go into trouble. Look, that's just the way it is, and we do have to kind of face that. But wouldn't it be really good, wouldn't it be good and mature and healthy if we could figure out a way, not every time, but most times, to go from triggered, which we always will, always will, triggered, to using our training and not taking a pit stop in trouble, or not spending days in trouble,
Yes.
or not spending hours even in trouble. How much better could your marriage be? But listen, we've been there,
And how
right?
much more energy could you conserve for more positive things
Yeah.
than all the juices that you talked about that go on like that? That's exhausting.
Yeah, so
That
we
takes
want
up
to,
energy.
and we're going to be reminding you of these words. So you're going to get triggered or you're going to get trapped. And that's going to lead to trouble. But there should be training, and there can be training.
Yes.
And we've got to believe that we can train ourselves through this. We have got to believe that we're better than that little panicky part of our brain that is trying to help us, but in the case of our marriage, it's hurting us. So we've got to be those overcomers in that.
Absolutely.
So trigger, trouble, training, the 3 TRs,
Yes.
the 3 Ts to help us all get through this.
So in the next sessions, because we're going to do this for a number of episodes, we are going to have tonight's first part, but we're going to have 3 more parts where we talk about triggers and traps more specifically and help you identify, what they are in your marriage. We're going to talk about boundaries. We're going to talk about that psychological fear. We're going to talk about a big trigger, which is just a fear of aloneness. What you just did right now just proves to me I'm all alone in this. There's just base psychological feelings that we have, and we need help. We need training to know how to recognize them, and of course sometimes we need actual professional counseling to deal with past trauma. And so we always want to talk about, even if what you are hearing tonight or in further episodes, if even just listening to this triggers you, you may need to seek professional help.
Yeah,
so we
absolutely.
really want to encourage that.
Absolutely, and you want to take that seriously too as well. But before we conclude, we want to sort of shift a little bit. So I think we've kind of made it clear. Tonight we're hoping, and we don't want to frustrate you with this, but we're hoping that this kind of be an intro section, just an intro into the idea of thinking of triggers. We know all of you understand triggers.
Yes.
But it's more just an acknowledgement and maybe an examination in your own marriage. What's up with triggers in our marriage? What's up with triggers with each other? Is it happening a lot? Is it happening a little? If it's happening a little, amen, let's celebrate. If it's happening a lot, let's take a look at it a little bit. So that's what this introductory portion
and
is.
hopefully after tonight, you in this next week, until we even are back together again, try and recognize if maybe you have been unaware of things, frustrations that you've been feeling that really you're not really aware that, oh wow, that's actually a trigger that happens more than once. It's always coming back around. It's probably a trigger.
Yeah. And one way that we cannot ultimately use triggers against, and I think you wanted to talk a little bit about that, right? About the dangers of using triggers against each other, because
yes,
that can be a temptation
absolutely.
sometime, right?
Since your spouse has triggers and traps just like you do, you want to be protective of them. You don't want to take advantage of knowing what their triggers are. I mean, it would be a really
you're
unhealthy...
going to know what their triggers
It
are.
would be a very unhealthy marriage if you actually use their triggers against them. You want to do the opposite. We want to protect each other and really understand each other and be curious. Be curious. Ask your spouse, instead of reacting to their reaction, ask them what they're feeling. What are you thinking? What just happened there?
Yeah.
And really try and understand each other's triggers more.
So kind of our concluding, not entirely concluding, but a concluding thought as we come to the end of all this, we want to say this. So the first part was us kind of looking at our own triggers. What triggers you? What triggers me? What triggers Lisa? Okay, that's fair. Now ponder that a bit, and maybe we're gonna need to take a little bit of ownership. Maybe we're gonna have to get some training so we can move through that. But wait a minute, this isn't just a self-help book that helps only you. This is a marriage that you're involved in. And so there is a responsibility that a spouse has to help the other in times and troubles and traps like these. Now, it's interesting because we've read a lot of material on this, and some psychologists are going to say things like, your triggers and your traps are your responsibilities and not your spouse. They don't have anything to do with it. It's your problem. Figure it out. And I understand what they're saying. We know where they're coming from because they're desperately trying to get people to take responsibility for themselves and stop putting it on their spouse. That being said, that is an unhealthy thing. You got to take responsibility for yourself. But let's remember this, especially as people of faith. There is grace in this relationship. There is a cheering for. There is a protecting
I got your
of
back.
this.
Absolutely.
There is a oneness, right? That one flesh. So all that has to happen. And so this is really one of our final suggestions, is, as Lisa said, that we need to, I think you said this already, to be curious. Here it is in just plain and simple words. Part of this trapping and triggers that we fall into, we need to be people who help our spouse with that. Not hate our spouse because of that. Help them with it. That means you have eyes to see what they're going through. More than likely, you see their triggers more than they do.
That could be.
Because triggering is, and trapping is oftentimes a blinding thing.
Yeah.
And when you do, I mean, usually this is why we're talking about it with marriage. When we do see the other's traps and triggers, what often comes out that's not the best for marriage, right? A lot of these comments that we don't want to come out in our marriage, but they come out like, again, haven't you?
Yeah.
When are you going to learn? I'm so tired of, all of that. What if you push beyond the irritation of those and start to look and go, what is going on there? And what can we do? What's a good thing? You said that we should be curious.
Yes.
What would be a good thing to ask or to say?
Well, I think really just, I mean, if you could say, what did I do? Like, that would be a good thing. Like, is it me? What am I doing that's setting you off? That would be a good question to ask.
What are you feeling?
What are you feeling? Yeah.
What's going on?
Yeah. What are you thinking?
And tell me, where is this?
I know that
from,
when we talked about the spider, I know that when I realize the trigger is a fear in me, then I can just see my fear as the problem and not Kevin as the problem.
Yeah.
And I can figure out why am I so afraid of, X, Y, Z? And when he said that, it brought me there. He says something and it brings me somewhere else, and really trying to figure out that problem.
I'd like to read Galatians chapter 6. Lots of you know this passage, not all of you. Lots of you know it. It's very interesting because it's talking about somebody, and the wording is actually caught. It's talking about somebody trapped.
Some of the versions say someone overtaken or overwhelmed by, so it's very much like a trap.
And listen to it, and can we stretch ourselves and put it in the context of marriage? Brothers and sisters, if someone is caught in sin, let's talk about what we're talking about today. If someone's caught in a trap, if someone is triggered and they're captured by that triggering, if someone is caught in a sin, you who live by the Spirit should restore that person with irritation. No, you should restore that person gently. But watch yourself. Now, this is where it comes out. Okay, so let's have grace for the person who's triggered, grace for their fears, and let's talk about this. I need to understand more. Let me have compassion. Let me have curiosity, all that kind of stuff. But then listen to what comes after it. But watch yourself, or you may also be tempted. You may also be triggered. Chances are you absolutely are going to be tempted, triggered, trapped. Carry each other's burdens, and in this way you'll fulfill the law of Christ. If anyone thinks they're something when they are not, when any of the, can I do my Kevin Robbins interpretation of this scripture? Anyone who thinks they don't have triggers, they don't have traps, they're all that, they're not. They deceive themselves. And so that's Galatians chapter 6 and verse 1. And so, as I said, at the ending of what we're talking about here, absolutely, triggers and traps are good for us to take responsibility for and start to figure ourselves out. You may find yourself reacting a lot with those base reactions. Why, and these are kind of the questions till we meet again. If you're angry a lot, why are you angry? Well, I'm angry because X. No, it's not really that, is it? It's the dishes.
Inside. Yeah, something inside.
Something else is going on there. How about if you're fearful all the time? If you're overwhelmed all the time? If your body is reacting? The blood's not going to your stomach, but it's going to your thighs because you want to run all the time. What's going on there? So yes, on the front end, that's a good question for us. And then kind of on the back end, but you're married, taking care of each other, having a vested interest in what is going on.
Yeah.
This fear you have, I want to understand it better, because if you read our book, I did not understand that spider fear at first. It made no sense to me, and I reacted the absolute worst way. What I did, I perpetuated the fear. I increased the fear. I heightened it. Bad thing to do. That's because I did not, when someone was caught, I didn't restore her gently. It's a dangerous thing.
I love that scripture, and I love reading it in all different versions because it really portrays the vision of course, the Christian community, but we are the Christian community just husband and wife, of we're in it together. No one's better than the other. Everyone's got their stuff, and we can carry each other's burdens. I think that's just really, really deep.
It's good.
Yeah.
So, all right, so we wanted to just conclude by saying a couple things.
Well, first of all, again, if you weren't here at the start, if you would like to access our marriage conference that we just had with a wonderful interview with Marion Gertz, we would recommend that you take a look at that if you haven't seen it, and you can go to, in the description, you can see the website.
Yep, you can still sign up for that and get
Register,
the private link,
yep.
and you can go and watch that.
And also in the description of tonight's episode is our book launch was at the conference, and if you would like to buy our book, we think it's great.
You hear about spiders.
You can go to Amazon, and the link is in the description of tonight's video. Our friends in Germany sent us a picture of them holding the book. They ordered it in Germany and got it the next day. Pretty amazing.
Yeah, isn't that amazing? There's just two other things I want to say before we say goodbye, and this is that. This is that. This is this. This is that. Here we go. If you have been so kind, and we are really so grateful, but if you've been so kind and ordered our book or got our book, we're thankful. If you've enjoyed it, if it's benefited you in some way, if you could go back to Amazon and leave a review, if you have a positive review that you'd like to give, we would appreciate that. Apparently that's how the world runs. Don't ask Kevin and Lisa why that's the way the world runs, but apparently that's the way the world runs. Everything's on review right now. If you have a bad review of our book, what we'd appreciate is go to wildmarriage.com and just send me a comment. We do want to get better, and apparently if you leave bad reviews, that's not going to either, one, help me get better or help the book get better. So go to wildmarriage.com and leave me your thoughts of how we can get better or I can get better. But if you do have a good review, we'd appreciate if you put that on. And even here, if you drop a comment on YouTube after tonight's message, we'd be thankful for that. And let me, if I may,
and come
honey,
back.
can I just conclude with one final thought?
Yeah.
We've noticed in the world, and this is kind of just a good, I think, a good suggestion on the way out. I'm going to talk about something that's a little bit iffy, a little bit risky, a little bit politically incorrect.
Okay.
Last night, apparently there was a worldwide presentation, an interview that Oprah did with members of the royal family. And to be honest, we didn't watch it together. It was not a really big thing, but I caught a couple words from it, and I've noticed today on social media that everybody has dramatic opinions about this interview and what people said in the royal family. And so we have relatives in England who are posting on their Facebook today, "We stand by the Queen," and we've got other relatives in Canada say, "We believe these royals." And Kevin and Lisa aren't into that so much, so please don't even make a comment here or there. That's not what we're talking about. But here's something that I caught just as I was passing by last night, and I wanted to share it with you.
Okay.
And that is this. Something that stood out to me in all of this, and I'm not taking any sides because I don't know enough about it, and I don't even know if I should. It's not my business. It's not that part of it. But at some point, I heard a married couple, and I don't really care who they are, but I heard a married couple where they said, "We had all of this going on in our life, and at some point, he said, 'I choose my wife.'" And I want to leave you with that thought. No matter what's going on in your life, no matter what's going on in your world,
So beautiful.
you might have people attacking you. You might have people saying, "You should do this differently. I can't believe you did that." You might have people saying, "You've let me down. You're not good enough." All the things, all the messaging that we hear all day long, all of the decisions we have to make sure that you make this one decision. I choose my spouse. No matter what, I don't know what the world is going to hold for me. I don't know how things are going to go. Will things go good? Will things go bad? Will things go up? Will things go down? Who knows? But I know I'll do this. I choose my spouse.
That's fantastic.
I choose my wife.
Fantastic.
So if you do that,
Great thought, honey.
that might be a really
great
good
closing
way
thought.
to work on your triggers and your traps,
Yes.
which ultimately lead to trouble.
Yes.
But with training, you can get through it all. Did I bring enough teas into that?
That's fantastic. And come back on March 22nd for our next Marriage Monday. And we would love to have you join us where we talk again more about marriage triggers and traps.
Good night, everybody. Thanks for being with us.
Good night.